Learning several languages at the same time is possible, but it is more complex than just learning one language. And in this video, I'm going to share the 5 most effective science-backed strategies if you want to learn several languages in parallel. And if you're thinking, who is this lady and why should I listen to her? My name is Esther. I'm a doctor in language education. I have studied 9 languages throughout my life to different levels of proficiency. And while I was training to become a professional translator and interpreter, I was at university for 4 years and I was learning 5 languages at the same time while I was polishing my 3 main languages in which I was doing my studies. So I do know a little bit about learning several languages at the same time. Bear in mind what I was doing wasn't typical. Most students were learning maybe 3, 4 languages at the same time. And which was interesting is that all the lessons we had were with separate teachers who were teaching us those specific languages, so be they German, Russian, Italian, as if it was our first foreign language. So completely ignoring the fact that we were very multilingual and already had different levels of proficiency in many other languages. Which means that we as students had to develop our own strategies to try to make the learning more efficient because, as you can imagine, we still had 24 hours in our days and a ridiculous number of languages to work with. So we ended up developing our own little strategies to learn in a more effective way. But then when I started my PhD, I discovered that some of those strategies were actually science-backed. Some of them weren't so much, and there were little modifications that we could do to make them even more efficient. So based on both my experience and the research that I studied for years, I've put together this list of what I think are the top 5 most effective strategies that you should definitely consider if you want to learn several languages in parallel. And if you are learning a language but you're feeling stuck and like it doesn't matter what you do, you are still not progressing, you might be interested in my workshop, Clear Your Way to Fluency. This is a 60-minute session during which you are going to take a unique test I have developed to help students just like you who are feeling stuck understand why they're stuck, what are the roadblocks, and most importantly, what actions they need to take straight away if they want to overcome these roadblocks. If you think you might be interested, you can check all the details in the link in the description. Their first strategy is to learn to manage and to leverage language transfer. Now, what is language transfer? Language transfer is what happens from one language to another. And this transfer can be positive or it can be negative. And when it's negative, we call it interference because it means that you are basically mixing languages in a way that is not intended. Now, when you already know a few languages and are trying to learn additional languages, you are going to have to manage the transfer across the languages you already know and the ones you are learning and across the languages that you are learning. And there are different ways to go about it. One of the things you can do is to set up separate sessions for each language. So you may want to have separate times during the day or during the week when you're going to work exclusively on one of the languages. And then you're going to set integrated sessions. That means sessions in which you are going to work across the different languages. And here, again, you can do it across the languages that you are learning or across the languages you are learning plus the languages that you already know. I would recommend that if you have already quite strong skills in the previous languages, you leave those aside unless they are very closely related, like they're very similar to the ones you are learning and you can leverage them. But usually if you already have very strong skills in a number of languages, you are going to focus those sessions on the languages that you are learning if you are learning more than one at the same time. And what I want you to do in these integrated sessions is to work with the 2 languages at the same time. So that means that you might be doing little translation tasks where you are maybe reading a text in one language and trying to summarize it in another. You are going to create lists of words and you're going to want to get the same words in the other language to try to see how they compare, and also because it's going to be easier to remember both of them. Now, how do you keep them separate? And this is super important. There are different ways and it depends on the type of learner you are. Color coding usually works quite well. So you may want to have, like, I remember doing this back in the day where you'll have the list of words and then you'll have them in different colors for each of the languages. I'm a very visual person. I have a very good visual memory. So for me, that worked really well. And for a number of students, it works really well, but not for everyone. What my worked as well really well is mind maps, and you can also introduce the colors in the mind maps, again, if you are a fairly visual person. If you are not, you can do, for example, a log of your errors when the errors are coming from the interference between the languages. And this usually helps quite a lot. If there are words that you're always confusing, put them in a separate list so that you are more aware of them and you have more chances of actually remember that you shouldn't mix them. And it's really good as well when you're doing productive tasks such as speaking or writing in one of the languages to look at the errors that you are making and analyze them and think, are these errors coming from my mother tongue? Are these errors coming from one of my languages that I already know and that I am very confident about? Or are they coming from this other language that I'm trying to learn in parallel? And that's, again, just a matter of raising the awareness we have of the reasons why we are making mistakes and to what extent the interference between the languages is going to be the root cause for those errors that we are seeing. So remember that language transfer can be hugely useful, especially if the languages are closely related or closely related to other languages that you're already fluent in, but it has to be managed well. The second strategy that I would recommend is that you develop your metalinguistic awareness. And what does it mean? Metalinguistic awareness is your awareness about the language itself and about the languages as entities. So how can you do this? For example, you can read about the languages, especially if you're learning languages that are quite different from those you already know. Learn about the grammar, learn about how the system works, how about the language works, because that's already going to help you draw similarities and differences with the languages that you already know or with the other languages that you are learning. And it's kind of like giving you a heads up of like, okay, this is what I should expect. And I mentioned this in a short video, and I'll do a longer video on this, but back in the day, I did some research with interpreters at the European Parliament, and it was quite interesting. All of them speak quite a large number of languages very fluently, and then have an even larger number of languages that they are just able to understand very well to a very high standard, but they are just not able to speak because they are not interested in that. They just need to understand the languages for their job. And quite interestingly, many of them told me that one of the first things they do when they are going to start learning a new language is to read books about the language. So they have already this metalinguistic awareness and they really want to understand what they are embarking on. I understand that you may not enjoy grammar books. So another thing that you can do is to just compare the languages, compare the grammar, compare the vocabulary, compare the pronunciation. But don't just do these separately. Do this together. Do this on purpose. Do this as a task where you set time and you are going to compare how the different structures work in the different languages, how the same things are called differently or they are called similarly but with a slightly different nuances, how they're written the same way, but maybe they are pronounced in a completely different way. And then the last thing that you can do within this strategy is to journal about any points that cause confusion. So when you are learning languages and you start identifying points that you're like, oh, this is going to be a problem, write it down, create a little journal of your confusion points across languages. And that's extremely helpful because, again, that's raising the awareness you have of these confusion points. And we know from research that usually, not for everyone, but usually that helps reduce the confusion and help you progress faster. The third strategy is that you put in place environmental support for your learning. What do I mean by this? What we know from research that sometimes works really well is that, for example, if you choose different rooms to study the different languages, if your house has enough rooms, of course. Jokes aside, you can find different environments where you can study the different languages, so you are associating the language with that specific environment. And your environment is as well the people that are around you. Find different groups of people with whom you are going to practice each of those languages. Anything that is going to help you learn the language in specific context, it's going to be really helpful because a lot of the learning happens through emotions and through experiences and through those memories of those experiences. So you want to make sure that you create an environment, a context in which you can easily associate language, words, expressions, sentences with a specific person, with a specific context, with a specific color, decoration, anything that will link the language to something else in your brain. It will help your brain remember it distinctly from the other languages, and therefore it's going to help you learn faster. Now, the fourth strategy that can be really, really helpful is to enhance your cognitive flexibility. What is your cognitive flexibility? It's your brain's ability to switch, for example, from one task to another, because that process is going to be very similar to switching from one language to another. And eventually, when you speak several languages, what you want to be able to do is to switch efficiently and very fast from one language to another, so that you can interact in whichever language you need, in whatever context you need, without necessarily mixing the languages or getting confused. Now, what can you actually do to develop your cognitive flexibility? There are some activities that you can do that are not language related. There are a lot of apps and games that you can download on your phone or on your computer, and that can help you with cognitive flexibility. So I encourage you to check. There are a lot of little games, and they're quite fun actually. They're proved to help, because think about your brain as a muscle, right? Like if you go to the gym and you are working to have very strong arms and to have very good muscles in your arms, it's going to be great because you're going to be able to lift heavier in the gym, but it's also going to be super helpful when you go shopping and you have to carry all of these heavy bags, right? Because it's the same muscles that are working. So this is a bit the same principle with your brain. If you're doing tasks that are going to help your brain develop that specific part that is used for switching tasks and having that cognitive flexibility, then you're going to be able to apply that as well when you are learning and trying to use different languages. Then another thing you can do for this is to practice switching tasks really fast. The process in the brain that switches languages is the same one that switches tasks. And we know people that are able to speak several languages, who are multilingual, have a special ability to switch tasks really fast. So any exercises, even within the same language, but that are going to force you to switch tasks fairly fast and to get your brain from one mode to another, back to the same, back to the other one, back to the same, back to the other one, that's going to be really, really helpful, because again, that's the same muscle that we're going to need later on. And the third thing you can do if you want to develop your cognitive flexibility, and this is language related, is to do tasks that force you to switch from one language to another. So don't overdo these exercises. They should be quite short, but they could be like drill tasks where you're just going very fast from your first language to your second, from your second to your third, from your third to your fourth, and then from your fourth to your second, and then from your second to your first. And then doing that kind of exercises is going to be really, really helpful. Again, for the same reason, we're just developing the same muscle that we're going to use for all of those very similar tasks. And then the fifth strategy, and I know this isn't really like a strategy, but I'm including it here because I think it's important that you remember that this is an option. It's that you take a sequential approach to language learning. That means instead of trying to learn all these languages at the same time, if you feel that's too much, then put one on pause, put it on standby, focus on the other one, manage to get that one to a bit of a higher level. And then once you're feeling a bit more confident about that one, then you reintroduce the other one. And why is this important? I have another video that I'll put somewhere around here and in the description as well. And in that video, I explained that when you are learning several languages, what happens is that if you end up with too many languages that are at a low level of proficiency, those languages still require a lot of your brain power to use them. So let's imagine them, okay? And don't quote me on this because, if there are any neuroscientists watching this and they hear me speaking like this, they'll think like she doesn't know a thing. Now, okay, the brain doesn't work like this. This is just an image that I want you to have so that it's helpful and that you can understand the process a bit better when you are struggling. So imagine that you have these languages, right? That they are all in the same part of the brain because you are still not able to use them in an automated way. And they are taking a lot of resources because they're all taking space and they're all taking brain power to maintain them and to keep learning them. Now, if you take one of those and you put it in a different part of the brain that takes care a bit more of the automated production of language, right? When you've already mastered the language, when you feel comfortable in a language that you don't really need to think that much about the rules and about the words, it comes quite naturally to you. Now, that is using a different part of the brain. So I want you to imagine that that language moves like a different part of the brain, and therefore it frees up some of the resources in this other part so that you can continue learning those languages that you were struggling with. And it happens quite often when you do this, when you just pause one language, work on that one, and then come back to the others, that you're like, wow, suddenly it's so much easier. Yes, it is, because you have more resources available. You've made more resources available to those languages, so now you can learn them faster. So I know again that this isn't a strategy as such, but I do think that sometimes it is a strategy, because you have to be very strategic when you are learning languages, and that involves as well deciding when it's time to stop a language or when it's time to pause learning a language and focus on other languages that for some reason have become more important, more urgent, more relevant in that specific time in your life. So these are the top 5 strategies that I would recommend that you try out if you are thinking about learning several languages at the same time, or if you are already doing it and struggling. I think they are very, very helpful, but I would still recommend that you think about it twice before doing it, because there are situations where it makes sense, but there are many situations where I see students just enthusiastically wanting to learn all the languages in the world, and to be honest, you're probably better off just learning one, especially if it's your first foreign language. Make sure that language is strong enough. Make sure that you are really comfortable speaking that language, that you're very familiar as well with the learning process. The first language you're learning, it's a very steep learning curve, because you're not just learning the language, you are discovering how your brain likes learning languages, what strategies you should use, what works for you and what doesn't work. There's a lot of time that is wasted in that process, and adding extra languages is not going to accelerate it. It's probably just going to make it slower actually for the first language. So if it's the first language, I would recommend that maybe you take a step backwards and then focus for, I don't know, 3, 6 months, a year in one language. Try to improve as much as possible your skills in this language. And then you can start introducing a third language. And you will see that because you have developed already those skills, because your brain has already started changing and it has more of those metacognitive and cognitive abilities available for you to use, learning that third language, it's going to be easier. But again, if you are still not sure and thinking that you might still want to try learning a couple of languages at the same time, or maybe you're already fluent in quite a few and you're just looking for a bit more of motivation about why you should continue learning 2 or 3 or more languages in parallel, I recommend that you watch this video where I look a little bit more in depth at the science of learning and using different languages and at the different factors that you should consider if you are thinking about doing it and learning several languages at the same time. So in any case, good luck, and if you've got any questions, remember to check my community where you can ask me any questions and I will record videos in the future answering those questions.